Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, have we been productive at all over the last week or two, given that we're running between our computers and the TV? TV, computers.
Yeah, right. Hi, everyone. Lisa Ringerfield here, she, her pronouns. No, I have it on in the lounge in the living room. And
Yeah.
every time I hear the audience gets a little louder, I get up out of my seat and I run in there to see what's happening.
Well, at least you're getting your steps in, like
Yeah,
going back and forth in the
I
house to go
am.
peek at the Olympics and then get back to work. And yeah, it's
Yes,
it's hard.
I
It's
know.
tough.
I know.
It is tough.
It
Well,
has been
yeah.
pretty tough. Yeah.
Well, I think I read somewhere where someone wanted to declare it like a national holiday here in the US because we're not being
Yeah,
productive anyway. So why act like it type thing? So, which I thought was hilarious. So
right.
you never know. You
Right.
never know. But yeah, good to be back on with you. Let's dive in because we have so much to talk about because there's been a lot going on, whirling and swirling around us in regards to everything, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's just general public. We're in the middle of yet another presidential election series here in the US. We got a lot to talk about. So, Lisa, tell
Mhm.
us about the word or concept of the week.
Yes. So this week we were going to define dog whistle, which you know what a dog whistle is in the physical sense of it being a whistle used for dogs. But we are wanting to talk about it in the sense of the ways in which it's being used in the media to denote a particular way of talking about someone. So I have heard dog whistle used by the media several times over since Vice President Kamala Harris took over the nomination, right? So she is a black woman, Asian woman, and so the attacks on her have been veiled and they have been both racist and sexist. But because they are not explicitly racist and sexist, but rather peddling in racist and sexist tropes and stereotypes, the media refers to those kinds of statements as dog whistles. So if someone is trying to convey a racist thought and they are doing it in a coded way using suggestive language and it exists within the kind of political messaging, then that would be known as a dog whistle. But because it's not explicit, it doesn't always tend to create the response or opposition to the statement, right? So if someone were to say, Kamala Harris won't be a good president because she's a woman and women aren't as smart, right? That's not a dog
Mm-hmm.
whistle. That's just expressly sexist,
Right.
right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But if they were to say Kamala Harris won't be a good president because I'm trying to think of a good example because she um hasn't done a lot in the vice presidency because Biden didn't necessarily feel comfortable pulling her in
Mm-hmm.
because, her
Mm-hmm.
knowledge of foreign policy is limited, right? And there, kind of that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
It would be a coded way of saying that she isn't very intelligent, right? And
Mm-hmm.
therefore shouldn't be president. So you got to watch out for this. We've already talked to you about critical media consumption, but those dog whistles are flying left, right, and center. And so always think about what is the hidden meaning in what people are saying, because with her being a woman of color, it's just every
Yeah.
day. There's
Every day.
someone doing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Every day. Or, you know, I think what's important to remember is again, folks that listen to us, we're not saying create something that's not there, but what we are saying is that when people use these diversions or coded language that's not explicit but is pattern of language, then that becomes the challenge. So, Lisa, I've even thought about people that say that people of color are so well spoken when, they're, maybe an orator or they've, conducted a workshop or what have you. it's one thing to say it one time. It's another thing when you hear it as a pattern and it is a veiled thought around, I expected this person not to be well spoken. Then it's like, I'm trying to signal something to you. I did not think you were worthy of, whatever, whether it's the job or the role or the responsibility. And it's frustrating because we know it shows up all the time, but we just have to be aware of it, right? Um, so I think it's just hilarious that it uses the word dog whistle, because it's like certain people are supposed to hear it and certain people are not supposed to hear it. And that's exactly what happens in politics. So there you have it. But we got so much going on. And we know now that a vice presidential candidate has been announced. It's just going to keep on going. They have to find things to pick at, of course. So, but anyway, let's roll into phase one. Hot off the press, y'all. I mean, I'm talking about, we just turned off TVs and turned on our microphones for this podcast to talk to y'all about a hot topic that just occurred at the Olympics with Noah Lyles. Noah Lyles is the Olympic champ in the 100-meter. He was trying to pull off the double with the 100 and the 200-meter gold, which has not happened since, I want to say, 84 with Carl Lewis, I believe I've read. And so given that, it's been quite a bit of time since that's even been possible. And let me be clear, it was tough with the 100 because the last place finisher in the 100 was still faster than Carl Lewis's time in the 80s. So that tells you how fast the entire field was. But anyhow, today, Noah Lyles comes in with the bronze, third in the 200 meters, which he has said himself that the 200 is his quote unquote wife. The 100 is his mistress, right? Meaning that the 200 is his specialty. Now I got problems with the language, but I'm just giving you the quote, okay? And so he had his 200 today, 200 final. He came in with the bronze. Botswana came in with gold at a time of 1946. US came in, Kung Fu Kenny, which they call him, Kenny Bednarik, came in with 1962. Noah Lyles came in with a 1970 and then proceeds to leave the track. He heads towards some medics. He's seen kind of, pulling his jersey off. He's talking to folks sitting in a wheelchair asking for water. And lo and behold, it's revealed to the entire world that he tested positive for COVID 2 days prior. Now, Lisa, I am hot as fish grease about this for a number of reasons. First of all, most people know, if you follow my social media, I'm a fan of Team USA. I'm meh about Noah Lyles because I just think he takes the showmanship thing way too far. And I'm not saying be humble. I'm just saying that he is overly confident in such a way that it just turns me off. Okay, fine. But this is ridiculous. And I read another article that said today is Thursday that we're recording, y'all, to reveal to you. 2 days prior to his race at 5 a.m., he wasn't feeling good. He thought it was more than just being sore from the 100, tested and found that he was positive. So then he says his first thought was not to panic, thinking he's been in worse situations. He's run with worse conditions. He took it day by day, hydrated, quarantined off, and he still ran. Now, context, Lisa, which we did not know, was that unlike the Tokyo Olympics and the Beijing Olympics as well, there were strict policies there. There are not any protocols in Paris right now. So if an athlete tests positive in Paris, there's nothing preventing them from competing. So that puts the onus on the individual, which I know is tough after you've been training 4 years for 20 seconds, but the onus is put on the athlete to determine whether they would race or not. So there you have it, Lisa. What say ye? You already see my face.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I just want to say that Usain Bolt has done the double in 12, no, 8, 12, and 16. So the last American to do the double was Carl Lewis
American.
84.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha. Gotcha.
so I have some mixed feelings about it because I watched the race and I saw him come bouncing out. I mean, jumping like 3 feet high, like full of energy. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? You are about to run 200 meters where you need every ounce of bounce. Like, just stroll out to the blocks, right? Like, I understand that you're hyping yourself up and that's piece of it, but you don't need to jump 3 feet in the air twice. Like, that's your spring, right? And you've just used it up. And so now, retrospectively, I'm thinking, oh, you knew you had COVID and you still did that? So, what are you doing? Just in terms of a logistical thing about wanting to maximize the likelihood you can win the race. And I'm torn on this one, Shaunna, because I do think it raises this issue around community responsibility that we've talked about before. Obviously, was a big dividing point during the pandemic about what's more important, your own individual right to do the things that you want to do and wear a mask or not wear a mask, or thinking about yourself as one of many and not wanting to create risk for other people who might be immunocompromised or have something else, right? And how and at what point do you sacrifice your own needs and wants for the good of the many? So I do think about this in this context, and we know that during COVID, the folks who were most impacted by that virus and were most harmed were communities of color, people working in the service industry, so in low wage jobs, older people, people with all kinds of disabilities, right? So marginalized folks, largely. We are talking about the Olympics, obviously, but not everyone at the Olympics is a superstar, right? There are all those folks that are working at the Olympics, all those service providers, whether that's people who are cleaning the stadium, whether that's the medics, whether that's some other official, right? So to know you have COVID, know you are contagious, because at that point he probably still was contagious, and then to put yourself in those places where there are individuals that may not be as healthy or fit or able to bounce back, right? Getting COVID could be devastating to them. That feels icky to me and selfish. And at the same time, I'm also thinking about the fact, to your point, Shaunna, you said, you've worked 4 years for 20 seconds. So I can understand the drive or the desire to just go out and do it. What's 20 seconds? I'm outside, right? Like, it feels very on brand that Noah Lyles did that, right? Given given what you said. So I'm a
Yeah.
bit conflicted because I'm asking myself, what would I do if I trained that long to get to the Olympics and I came down with COVID 2 days before, and this was it. This was my shot, right? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I do, and I honestly
Mm-hmm.
don't know what I do. Right, even after saying all the things that I said about recognizing kind of the disproportionate impact of COVID and who might get harmed, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Does that
Well,
complicate things for you or no, Shaunna?
no, no, still doesn't complicate things for me at all. And the only reason why I say that, I think what you mentioned, everything that you mentioned, I understand and hear. Now that I've read that article, I'm more so thinking about the Paris Olympic Games that were not prepared, and the larger systemic point of people acting like COVID no longer exists, or if it does exist, that it's getting milder. Not the case. I mean, even with Noah himself having asthma, the fact that you have to think about people who are immunocompromised or have other conditions, again, I I understand that, especially when it comes to a sport, you and I know from endurance sport, a lot of it is necessarily selfish. Like, you were the one that individually got up early mornings and did the training. You're the one that sacrificed lots of things. You're the one that, never went to holidays or special occasions because you need to be out at the track. I get it. I mean, countless hours of being an amateur very amateur triathlete. And there are still some things where I'm like, I had to make some sacrifices of not being or doing certain things for this one goal that I cared deeply about. And at the same time, I'm still thinking about community. And we're talking about a global community where the guy next to you in the next lane, if he catches COVID, may not be able to go home over the next few days because he has to be quarantined, which comes at an extra expense that he may not have to begin with, and all these other things. Because also remembering too, I can't remember the name of the movie on Max, but it's a movie that specifically talks about the behind the scenes struggles of Olympians that don't have the resources to be caught in Paris for 3 additional nights, or, getting a different flight home or whatever it may be, or missing work because they're competing in the Olympics and having to stay extra days due to a quarantine situation. And so there are more Olympians than we can count that are not well off and cannot afford to be sick for any reason. I'm looking at the pictures of Noah coming off the track, and you're right, there are medics all around him, none of which have masks on themselves. I mean, to me, that is egregious. I still think it's not community minded. And this is a Olympic global community. And I'm not saying that, the entirety of a round two of COVID is resting on the shoulders of Noah Lyles, but he's certainly not helping the suppression of, COVID going back around the world once again. And so part of me feels like, yes, on brand with Noah's self centeredness. And at the same time, Paris, you weren't accountable in this measure either. Like, would you, why would you not consider any
Yeah,
infectious
yeah,
disease that could be spreading? I'm like, come on. That
right.
that to me sounds both individual and systemic at the same time to struggle with. And so, yeah, I can't put all the onus on Noah,
Mm.
but there's some there for me. And yes, I would be heartbroken and devastated, and yeah, it would be tough. I would need a therapist in the room with me while y'all are out there running 200, because I would be in utter heartbreak. Yet at the same time,
Right,
I do
right.
care about other people around me.
Doing the right thing.
I care about other people around.
Yeah,
I'm not an
yeah. In the
angel, but
kind
I
of,
care about other people around me.
yeah, in the global scheme of things, it wasn't the quote unquote right thing to do, right? Because the financial piece that you brought up, I think, is really, really important about who might be prevented from going home and what does that do financially to someone who doesn't have those resources. Not every, yeah. I think that's really, really valid and important, and help us understand the why this conversation is relevant to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yep.
this when you're listening to this pod, it will have been a few days ago, but so I'll be curious to know
Yeah.
what the media outlets have been saying, what he has been saying, or people around him have been saying since today. So we will see, but let's go ahead and move
Yeah.
into phase two. So we've talked about this issue before, imposter syndrome, but there is a new take on it we wanted to pass through today, and I do
Mm.
think it's relevant with the Olympics because I imagine there are many Olympians that have imposter syndrome, right? Disbelief that they are running on this global stage with some of the best athletes in the world, and what does that mean for them to be there? I mean, gosh, I think about the 1500, the men's 1500. Hawker, what's his first name? The guy that won? Why am I forgetting his first name?
Cole
Cole.
Hawker. Mm-hmm.
Cole Hawker, right? Like the whole focus was on the Norwegian and the Brit, right? And their rivalry. And he just, oh, it was brilliant. He just slides up on the inside and wins the gold. But I'm wondering, like, what does his experience of imposter syndrome feel like on a world stage where he was just there, like he wasn't a focus, right, of anyone's discussion previously. But Shaunna sent me this Twitter post, and it's a doctor who said, do you actually have imposter syndrome, or is it just that you have spent much of your life having your knowledge and skills subtly dismissed and devalued? So when I first read that, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's totally what it is. And then I kind of backtracked a little bit and was like, well, that's probably why the term imposter syndrome exists, right? Because if none of us experienced devaluing, dismissal, or invisibility, then the whole point or purpose of naming imposter syndrome would not actually exist, right? We wouldn't need to name it because I wouldn't have spent most of my life being ignored or undervalued because I'm a woman. So I just thought it was an interesting reframing because you hear about imposter syndrome a lot in academia, where particularly PhD students come in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't belong here. I'm not smart enough. I can't keep up." Right? But rarely is it then dissected or unpacked around what has led you to believe that you are an imposter. Like the feeling in the moment is
Mm-hmm.
addressed, like you're not an imposter, you can do this, right? But not what might have happened in your life, systemically or individually, that has led you to this point, right? So I don't think anyone ever talked to me about the fact, well, you know, talk to me about your upbringing or, how you were treated academically in school vis-a-vis boys, right? That sort of thing. So I think that this kind of
Oh, yeah.
illuminates another piece to it that is never part of the conversation, and that's that whole history, that whole lifetime of being
Mm-hmm.
devalued for some people, not
Mm-hmm.
everyone, right? Because some people spend a lifetime being pumped up and told they're great, even when they're kind of mediocre. But what do you think, Shaunna?
Mm-hmm. Well, I love what you're saying around let's get to the root of the concept because so I kind of envision it like this tree where identity is the tree, the root is whatever you've been fed, whether it's family, societally, wherever, and the branch of it is imposter syndrome or not. Like, which one do you get? Because when I think about other places and spaces where people feel like they do belong and have never felt an imposter syndrome in certain areas, it's because one, two, or both things. They've always been signaled or told they could. They've never been signaled or told they can't, or both. Like, I remember, talking to older family members that college, of course, is a huge deal to us that are first generation college students. And when you talk to some of your relatives prior to you that never went to college and it wasn't even on their radar, you'll get a mixed bag of responses as to, why did you never consider going to college? Well, for some, it was never ingrained in me that that was even an option. There are other people that were never told they could. There are other people that were constantly told they could not. There were people like me that were told in high school that you probably shouldn't. So, all of these messages that are none of the messages are signaling that it is indeed possible and a place for you. And so, if you get that from one or several different places your whole life and then you show up, and then once you do show up, skilled or not, because there certainly when I got to college, there were certain skills that I did not have. There was no reinforcement of, no, you don't have them right now, but you can get them. It was you don't have them. Um, the deficit model of teaching that there's something wrong with the student rather than what does the teacher need to do in response to what the student doesn't have yet, right? And so I think language is really important. When fortunately with younger people, especially in my family, we no longer have the first generation college phenomenon in our family anymore because they're no longer first generation. And so my boys, unlike me, don't exist in a world where it's impossible for them to go to college or a far-fetched idea. It's now the norm because every time you get up to go and use the doggone bathroom and down the hallway, you got to walk past degrees on the wall. It's normalized, right? Versus it would have been easier for me to go to the moon than figure out how to go to college as a first gen. It just wasn't part of the conversation. And so I do think we need to examine some of the roots of what's telling people they can't do something, what's not telling people they can do something, and this lack of growth mindset that just because you don't know how to do something doesn't mean that you can't figure it out. Because that's what most
Yeah.
of us are doing
Yeah.
when we get to college that first semester or year.
Yeah.
We're figuring 90% of it out.
Right. Right. Like never having some many people have never had to do some of the things that they have to do in college before, right? Depending on how their kind of home environment and such. But it's as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about two experiences. So one was actually a professor I had in college who I really liked. But when I was applying for graduate school in the US, I really wanted to do constitutional politics, which will not be a surprise to anyone who has listened to this podcast, right? That's what I wanted to do. And now that I'm like thinking about it, she wasn't really, um, she wasn't overtly dismissive of that, but I definitely picked up vibes that she didn't think I was smart enough to do it. And so I shifted and ended up applying to do higher education. And I remember her saying, "Oh, this seems much more like a better fit for you." Um, and it's so interesting because she was one of my favorite professors. She's no
Is
longer
that the
with
dog
us.
whistle? Is
That
that
might
the
be the
dog whistle?
that might be the dog whistle. Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, so it's really interesting. So that was a subtle, right? It wasn't an overt
Yeah.
Lisa, you're not smart enough to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Um and yeah, so as you were talking, that just popped back into my head. And so it's the dog whistle and it's the things that aren't said, right? But you're picking up on because you're intuitive and you hear things, right?
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
and I had a second example, but I've forgotten what that is now. So I don't know. Like,
No, you gave a
yeah.
good one. You gave a good one though, because you're right. It's the it's not the overt, it's the subtle. Like, why is it when I'm in high school, every time I walk past the guidance counselor's office, they had huge windows around. Every time I walk past the guidance counselor's office that helped people to apply for college, I never saw a person that looked like me in there. Or every person of color that I went to high school with that I talked to, they were specifically told by teachers or counselors, you should consider vocational school or community college, but don't consider a big 4-year institution where you got to pack up your footlocker and go to campus. Not one. Or the military is your quote unquote only option. Now, let me be very clear. I'm a strong proponent of the military. I'm a strong proponent of community colleges and vocational schools. We need all of that in our society. But when they're the only options that are provided to you and those options are not provided to other people, this is when there's a challenge. And so for me, I was like, no, I don't want to go to cosmetology school. I want to do my own damn hair. Go to college. Okay. That's what I want to do. And so I just deeply appreciate how, even as my parents didn't understand how to get to college or go to the next level, they just knew that they wanted it for me. And so they asked people a lot of questions. And my mother worked at a bank, y'all. So his daughters all went to college. And so she just went to work one day and sat down and had a conversation with her branch manager and said, I know all your girls went to college. My kid has the grades, but we have no clue where to start. And he detailed out every step of how to do it. Like, all of that can feed into, I didn't even know how to get here. And then you're starting to feel quote unquote lucky, which then is this unspoken, no signal told me on my way here that I belonged here. It kind of reminds me, Lisa, of, how when let's say you're driving along, right? And there's been a storm or, wind or whatever, and the signage that's supposed to tell you where to go, it's either pointed in the wrong direction, like, nope, you shouldn't go there, or there's no signage at all. That to me is how imposter syndrome feels like. It feels like this place, this, godforsaken place where there is little direction, if any at all. And you land in the place where you should be, where you're qualified to be, but there is no signage that says, welcome to. Denver. Welcome to Washington, D.C. You show up and you're still looking around trying to figure out, did I make it where I was trying to go? It's very off putting and counterintuitive. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I understand why
Mm-hmm.
people feel the way they do. And I still implicate systems for not telling people that this is an option or whatever isn't an option for them. It's just, it's off putting and it's unsettling
Yeah.
too. It's very unsettling. Like, you and I could
Yeah.
arrive
Yeah.
in Hawaii right now and see palm trees. Well, yeah, we kind of sort of think that we might be where we're supposed to be, but where's the clear sign saying that we are in the right place? That rarely happens for women, people of color,
Mm-hmm.
LGBT folks. The affirmation piece is the part I think
Yeah.
that's missing.
Yeah, and so that affirmation and encouragement and not kind of foreclosing on a person's option, that needs to happen from a very
Mm-hmm.
young age, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
To essentially like reduce the likelihood that that imposter syndrome is going to appear later. And it's never you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. Sometimes it is, but it usually comes it's much more veiled. And so I didn't actually intend this section to tie into the dog whistle, but it really does, doesn't it? Because if you are hearing those messages that are, for your whole life from the age of like 4, when you start school, then is there any wonder that when you proceed up the ladder, whatever, in whatever profession that is, education or otherwise, you start to doubt yourself? Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
just some
Mm-hmm.
food for thought about how maybe you're making assumptions and communicating those assumptions to people when they're younger about what they can and can't do, and how that might
Yeah.
ultimately be the groundwork for them to feel later on that they don't belong because they're not smart enough, or they're not capable enough, right? And that's that imposter
Mm,
syndrome. And it has been
yeah.
the groundwork, or the foundation has been quietly laid for 20 years, right? That's
Oh,
the piece
absolutely.
to think about, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly right. Absolutely. Oh, so let's dive into phase 3. And this is a unique one. I don't think that we've really head on addressed this topic in the past, Lisa, but right now the East Coast is kind of bearing down, hunkering down to deal with Hurricane Debby that's coming through. I realized, because it was not on my radar at all, Lisa, I realized that there were going to be some major emergency response impacts, challenges, and so forth on the East Coast when we were supposed to be speaking to an office in Charleston, South Carolina. And on Tuesday, they canceled a conversation for Thursday afternoon. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute, what's going on? And so they were, rescheduling an entire week's worth of appointments, conversations, and so forth. I said, okay, this probably is big. And so it got me thinking between that phone call and also Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott's post to prepare for Hurricane Debby. Heavy rainfall, tornadoes, gusty winds. There's probably going to be some tidal flooding in our area because obviously we're close to the Chesapeake Bay, all of that going on um, across the city and across the DMV area for several days. And so he posted a number of different city preparations, whether it was, if you need sandbags, this is where you find them, or, all outdoor recreation events, pools, everything closed, obviously. But here are also some shelters for you if you need a shelter at a specific recreation center. All of that got me thinking about the exacerbated experience for the marginalized folks in our communities when things like this occur. So it isn't, Lisa, just me after the storm blows over, walking outside to see if there's any tiles that have blown from my roof or any branches in my yard. And oh, I need to clean up a bit. It's, I'm unhoused. I'm on the streets or somewhere outside, and I need to literally find shelter. Where do I go without being turned away? Or thinking about, for example, if it's an undocumented person or family that may not want to go to that shelter or go get any assistance because there might be law enforcement outside. Or, let's say, for example, if you know that you need certain, let's say, accommodations. Let's say you need, it could be anything. It could be dialysis. It could be anything. But because you are already going to, let's say, a VA center or somewhere else, it's going to be even harder to get where you know you need to go. Public transportation, if you rely on that, and now public transportation is shut down because it's unsafe for drivers and so forth to be out and about. It just reminds me how so very fortunate I feel being in a place and space where, I got too much food to eat. I've got a warm place to be. I'm not unsafe. It's a matter of picking up a few sticks in my yard after everything blows over. How can I keep top of mind what's going on for other people? And so, with that, Lisa, you and I have a acquaintance of ours that does nothing but emergency planning, emergency response. And this is one of the topics that a lot of cities, states, et cetera, continue to build out in their work, where they keep saying we need to remember these marginalized communities, but there's not really a lot of teeth in. So how do we specifically do that? And so I just wanted to bring it up for conversation here, given that, Debbie's coming through, and, when is hurricane season? I think hurricane season is over in October. We're going to have more
Yeah.
of this to come, Lisa. And I just want to
Yeah.
think about it now as we can. But yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
Well, and with climate change, right, and more severe weather patterns and hotter, colder, wetter, windier, that's just going to continue to be a problem. And
So
it's
true.
actually a timely discussion because we are, I think we're about 1 year almost to the day from the Maui fires, if you all remember Maui Island. Um, there was a lot, or has been a lot, of discussion about their emergency preparedness and evacuation process because so many people were stuck in massive traffic jams trying to get out. Obviously, many folks had to jump into the ocean, some with success, others not. And the text messages that were pushed out to people's cell phones came too late. And so that particular piece makes me think about, well, what if you don't have a cell phone, right? How are emergency messages being communicated to community members who are not on a cell phone? They do not have access to that mobile technology, right? And I know that there's been lots of discussions in Maui with regard to that. And then also being in Colorado, we have a number of wildfires. Obviously, there's been tons happening in Canada and in California right now, but I'm also thinking about all of the folks in the foothills here. This most recent fire was pretty close to me, and many people were evacuated at a moment's notice. The sheriff is rolling around at 2 a.m. in the morning with a flashlight in their window saying, let's go. And there was a shelter at a local high school. But how useful is that for someone who has chronic pain or a chronic illness, right? Like, where are they going to be sleeping, and how is that going to exacerbate their ailments or what they're dealing with, right? Many people told me I needed a go bag. Have a go bag. You should always have a go bag, right? But not everyone has access to a go bag, right? Like, I just didn't have one because I was not prepared. But if you're living in a circumstance, whether that's unhoused or some other circumstance where you just can't have a go bag, right, and you have to leave quickly and you don't have any of your medication or, other documents, devastating, right? So I think your point here, Shaunna, is so important for us to think about the ways in which we are conceptualizing and understanding evacuation, whether it's for a hurricane, a fire, that we have to think that what might be perceived as a quote unquote normal feature of an emergency management plan is normal only because it's based on able-bodied, people who have access to financial resources, have
That's
access to
it. That's it.
transportation, have
That's
access
it.
to healthcare, right? Like, that
That's it.
isn't going to be applicable to everyone. Yeah.
Look, let me tell you, you're
Yeah.
you're you're giving me flashbacks to 2005 Hurricane Katrina conversations that just completely grated at me with those very same points where, folks that had not thought about situations other than their own, made it sound so simple to, why wouldn't you just evacuate the city? And why wouldn't you just, move somewhere else or go to higher ground or whatever it may be? And I know I'm quite a bit biased in this particular area because I did three different mission trips to New Orleans. One of them was immediately afterwards with the Red Cross, where we were still literally marking doors and identifying bodies and homes and so forth. The first trip, and then the second two trips was more so cleanup and so forth. But with that, it's not that simple. Like if I had to evacuate that area, then it's throw your bag in the car, go gas up, and head in this direction. It literally would take almost nothing if I had to, because I have the means to do so. Not the case for so many people. Like, exactly how are you supposed to get there? Okay, well, where are you going? What are you going to eat? Uh, whose home are you going to go to? Is there a shelter that has a cot or a bed for me? And that's not even including special needs and other things. And so, with that, I want us to be careful, careful, careful when, we hear on the news where, someone may say, Hurricane Debby is coming through. We're asking everyone in the city to evacuate, da 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 da. And then it's almost like an unfunded mandate. You're telling all these people to get out of here, but I don't see any buses pulling up for the people that don't have transportation. And I don't see any medical support for people that have some type of chronic illness. Like, you can't say it and expect it to happen, and then you don't provide the infrastructure for it to happen for the people that don't have the infrastructure for themselves. That, to me, that's where the emergency management plans come in. They become important because municipalities, counties, states, they are the ones that have to think about that gap. Like, are we calling University of Maryland that has a fleet of 50 charter buses to go pick up the homeless from this spot if we tell them to be at this church or this library and get them evacuated out of the city that's about to be affected? That's infrastructure versus telling them to leave and then being frustrated and pissed off they didn't because they had no other way to get out. Like, come on, we have to systematize it. We have to.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about incarcerated people, right? What are the
Oh,
plans to, that was a huge issue, obviously during COVID, which wasn't a wildfire or a hurricane, but kind of
mm-hmm.
touches on similar
Right.
themes. How are we thinking about the folks who are most vulnerable and most marginalized? I mean, I'm also casting my mind back to 9/11, which is obviously several
Oh,
years ago now, and
yeah.
thinking about what options and plans were available for folks who couldn't walk downstairs, right? Like because you couldn't take the
Oh, yeah.
elevators, and
Yeah.
that's still a reality. With folks just forgetting, able-bodied folks forgetting about people who are not able to get downstairs without the help of others, right? Like, what do
Mm.
you do you even have that written into your plan if you live or work in a 2, 3, 4 story bigger story building, right? Like, how is that
Yes.
even being integrated? Um,
Yes. Yes.
so yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot. There's a
Hmm.
lot there, I think, to think about. It's quite a big topic, and we have been very, very bad. We, the collective we, have been
Yeah.
very, very bad at thinking about all of the issues that you raise. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know this is such a small, trite example, but Lisa, you can probably commiserate with me on this. I'm just imagining, to your point, somebody that would need help, evacuating or getting out of a building or so forth. I'm like struggling to find my glasses to put them on in the middle of the night just to go to the restroom, much less to get myself out of, a building, and then,
Mm-hmm.
some other ailment. Something as small as that affects my ability to get to safety. Are we considering that it's not that simple? I feel like every time we have a
Right.
conversation, it's not that simple. Um, and just,
Yeah. It's not that
being
simple.
it's not that simple. And again, never trying to over create more difficulty than what's there. But sometimes I think we underthink what we should,
Yeah.
because there's much more teeth that we just don't get it to. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa,
All
I'm
right.
hoping that
Mm-hmm.
right now I'm looking out of my window and all we have is a little bit of a drizzle from Hurricane Debby. So I'm hoping that we stay in that area,
Okay.
that we just get a
Okay.
little bit of drizzle and no more. We'll see.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so all right, y'all. Well, this is a
Mm-hmm.
wrap
Mm-hmm.
for this particular episode. We hope that you continue to follow us, YouTube, Apple, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Instagram, LinkedIn. We got it. Whatever platform you need, you'll probably find us there. So please check us out. Send us emails at info@unfazedpodcast.com. And of course, you can find both the old and the new episodes on unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access everything regarding the podcast. So if you liked this week's episode, please like us, subscribe to us, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So, Lisa, until next week.
All right. Until next week.